Welcome to the third episode of the Lorelines podcast. This is Fowlin Hawk speaking. Please, if you enjoy our content, follow us on Twitter, Twitch, and subscribe on YouTube. And check out our website. Our handle is lorelinesxiv on Twitter and lorelinesxiv everywhere else. We will continue to grow with your support. And that brings us to this week's topic, Amaurot, metropolis of the ancients, a city that once fairly gleamed but is now lost to time. Motivation for our fate-worn antagonists, the only past. Where did it come from? Backdrop, history, and more. Ayumi, you can take it from here.
I'm just gonna have you narrate from here on out.
So I thought we were talking about Amaurot. All of my notes are useless.
Oh my god.
Well, he just has that sultry, sexy voice, so...
Hey, that's one way to ruin the mood, okay?
We're just starting, okay?
Guys, I wanted to add, anybody who's in the chat, we have a wonderful intro movie that will be ready for next week.
Everyone but...
Yes.
Oh, okay. I may have...
So apparently there's a lot of echo distortion.
Don't expect much from me. I'm actually live from the phone.
In case it
Yeah,
was
thank-
me, I'm back on push to talk.
For letting us know, and we'll sort it out. We're still figuring all this out, so we beg your patience.
Thank you for loving
Is
us.
that a little bit better? Speak, everyone!
Speak!
Alright.
For some
Like
reason,
it-
desktop
like-
audio showed
Like
up.
I said, that's yeah.
Okay, so let's start. You want guys? Let's introduce ourselves for people that didn't exactly catch us last week. Bonnie, you first.
Hi, I'm Bonnie. I'm a published author, Final Fantasy XIV addict, Soul Calibur 6 addict, who doesn't get enough sleep and is currently on her second can of monster drink. Kill me.
F.
Cobron.
Alright, my name's Cobron. I am a Final Fantasy XIV addict as well. Cosplayer, husband, general maker of Aetheryte and Ascian things, and I'm also responsible for Foxclaw getting a hold of the Eye of Midhogg and everything bad that's ever happened to Alphino.
Shadow. Meowth.
Hi, I'm Shadow Meow. Artistically known as the creator of quirks. I'm a concept artist. I'm a theory crafter by hobby, and visual rhetoric analyst, and basically that's all I can say. I also forgive my any mistake in English speech since I'm not native. So yeah, that.
That. Core healer.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I am a political scientist, fanfic writer, and also another Final Fantasy XIV addict. I've been lately getting my ass handed to me by a master's thesis, but I am very glad to have the opportunity to be here and take a break from that.
Neela.
It's rough. I'm Neela. I'm a fanfic writer, absolute Ascian stan, though I like all kinds of things about Final Fantasy, including how they set all the story up. I'm just very big fan. I'm sure that comes as a big surprise.
I'm sure it does. I'm Ayumi. You guys may know me from may know me as Ayumi Kurogane. I'm on the Excalibur server, Primal Data Center. I am also a Final Fantasy XIV addict, former fighting game addict, and just lover of all things RPG. I love helping people in game get to where they need to be as far as endgame is, and that's pretty much about all I can say. Really, if you ever need help in game, just let me know. Foul?
Yeah, Fallon Hawk here, Bard main, Excalibur, father of two, lover of all things ancient. I've got a history and anthropology background, but a lot of that has left me. But I'm here to contribute and have fun, and welcome to the party.
So, now that that's out of the way, let's begin our topic on Amaurot. Where shall we begin here? Shall we start at the beginning? Shall we start at the formation? Shall we start at, well, the ancients themselves?
Ooh, that's a hard question.
I honestly think we should start at what the inspiration for Amaurot in the game was.
I agree. The literary backdrop.
So let's begin there.
Yeah.
Who's the best person for this?
I would say core.
Core, go ahead and take it away if you have your theories. Go
All right. Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt or anything.
No.
Okay, so this may not always be common knowledge to anyone going through the course of Shadowbringers' story, but Amaurot is initially actually based upon Sir Thomas More's early 16th century work of political, both satire and political theory, called Utopia, as an ideal city at the center of like a island, a crescent-shaped island, out in the ocean close towards the New World, that was conceived by Moore and some of his friends back in that time, other quasi-political scientists of that era, as an ideal kind of civilization that blended a lot of the best aspects of then Renaissance era, almost into Reformation era political development, into something that would be potentially better, but also to a modern observer potentially worse, in that it had a lot of really interesting qualities to it that had never really been seen before, but a lot of like quirks to it as well that really sound really weird. Like, for example, everyone wore the same clothes, so it was very much kind of like a communistic society, but at the same time there was also things like slavery for even like what we would consider cursory punishments, like, oh, you've traveled somewhere without a passport, you shouldn't be doing that, if you do that again we're going to enslave you, that sort of thing. I get the sense that Ishikawa and the developers took a lot of inspiration for Amaurot's society in the general sense from Moore's book, but that they definitely added a lot of embellishment to it too, particularly in terms of its government, which initially is a elected princedom, kind of like the Holy Roman Empire of that era, but is very much tuned more towards the needs of the game as the convocation that we see.
All right. Would you like to add anything to this, Cobran, Neela, Fao?
I do have to add one thing real quick, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Previous listeners may know that I make sure that we maintain our quota of at least one pun per show. This one's easy this week. Utopia's title is itself a play on words. Utopia in Greek is the true place, but if you pronounce it utopia, which is how it's kind of spelled, that means no place, aka a place that doesn't exist.
And Moore's Utopia as a whole work is actually intended to be in part a satire because it is a play on the Greek language as a whole, which was kind of a lingua franca of scholars at the time. So between Moore and all of his fellow scholars at the time, they were all getting a kick out of reading all the different place names that were all kind of nonsense. That's actually how we got Hythlodaeus, because one of the characters from the story is the purveyor of nonsense, Raphael Hythlodaeus.
Yes, Hythlodaeus is his Latinicized name. You would probably, if you read Utopia in English, I read in Spanish. If you read Utopia in English, his surname is Hythlodaeus, but in Latin is the surname that we, of course, our dearest Hythlodaeus is renderized or portrayed. I don't know.
Which is really interesting because when we look at the nomenclature of things in Amaurot, everything is mostly based around Greek. But when you get to him, it's based in Latin. So I thought that was just a very interesting thing to not only exemplify that he is set apart from the others when we're sitting in the Amaurot DMV. He's the one who actually is somewhat self-aware, and he has a name that doesn't fit their nomenclature, which really just further sets him apart from everything else there. But that's something we only really see in retrospect now.
At the same time, Hythlodius, sorry.
No problem.
Sorry. At the same time, Hythlodius is a Greek term. I think it means two things. I just remember one. I think I just remember the foremost meaning. That's kind of dispenser of nonsense. But in hindsight, it's actually rather accurate. But I think there was some play between his name, Raphael, and the surname. But right now, I don't actually recall. I know there was something, but I actually, perhaps my crewmates know more about that than me.
I certainly know a fair bit about Utopia, but I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a complete expert on it. The main thing that I know is that it's largely based initially on a monastic kind of lifestyle and was taken in a direction that was very novel for the time, but for our modern interpretation might not necessarily be ideal as a society.
One thing I'd like to note is that, yes, Hythlodaeus does indeed somewhat mean purveyor of nonsense, but that shouldn't be taken to mean that he's lying to us or deceiving us. That's just it's a second-hand name for starters. He may have been. It's been so long since I read Utopia, I just don't remember much of the contents. But his role within the story of Final Fantasy XIV is to give us good information, but in a very particular delivery.
Yeah, in the story in Utopia, in the initial chapter, actually, Hythlodae actually travels to places in Spain and other parts of Europe to purvey like the good qualities of utopian society, and he is considered more of a reliable narrator in that sense. So I would say that bears out.
Purveyor of nonsense really sounds like a nickname that a certain someone would have given.
That's a funny thought. Maybe it was never his real name and Emmett Selk was being hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I believe it.
Sorry. It's just dispenser of nonsense enhance the concept of Ifrita to Assam. That's way to go.
I mean, we did go nuts over the grapes, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
One last thing that I would note about Utopia itself is that a lot of the place names that we see also are from the book. Particularly interesting to me, though, is that they name the entire district that we explore in the city, like in the game, after the Polylarites, who are considered to be kind of like policemen / lawyers who don't actually like use force to uphold the laws of Utopia. They kind of just debate you into submitting to the law, or if in extreme circumstances, forcibly ejecting you from the island.
However, every place in the district is named too. In Greek, there are words that pretty much mean the opposite of what they're intended. The polylarites means kind of much nonsense. Then there's I think it's the residential district, the Akora Heights, with the big tower from when Akora actually means without a home or homeless. And then there's the Macarenses angle. I don't actually remember what Macarenses meant. And then there's the Aniders, which are named after the Anidar River, which the Anidar means without water. So it's kind of display on stuff that it's impossible.
Everything in the city seems to be a contradiction, and that kind of works very well for a phantom city.
Indeed. I also think it's very clever what they did, taking this Anator, this river without water, and tying it to the life stream.
Yes.
And also
Actually
to the
true.
idea of knowledge as a river that flows in many directions.
That's a big
Actually-
discussion for another stream too, the life stream.
Yeah,
It
for
makes
sure.
me think of Thaliak,
Yes.
actually.
Yes, actually, yes.
Suffice it to say, I think they did Moore's book a good turn by taking it into a modern context and doing what they did with it.
Just an ad, I think this was mentioned, but it was written in Latin, and it is, when he said 16th century, he did mean the 1500s. This book is old.
Yeah, it's from, like, Sir Thomas More was Henry VIII's Lord Chancellor and a very prominent scholar of that era. So he's certainly from, like, the early 1500s. And his book has been widely
Yeah.
read and understood over many, many, many centuries.
Which also means it's public
Yeah.
domain and they can use anything they want from it.
Yep.
Of course. Also, there's this thing when if you're going to read Utopia, you have to consider which time period Sir Thomas More actually wrote it. So you have to understand that perhaps for our time, some things you're going to be like, oh wow, and this is considered. And this is the ideal society. But as I always like to say that you cannot judge history by or how do you say it, by our morals. So keep in mind that Utopia back in the time it was quite the revolutionary piece of work, you know. So
Absolutely. It's actually it's one of a few things actually that ended up getting More having his head cut off, unfortunately.
yes, yeah, that's how he died actually. Yeah, he was executed
Yes.
and beheaded. Yeah, yeah. Unsurprising coming from Henry.
That's a whole other
VIII.
story, but yes.
Yeah.
So, with that out of the way, shall we move on to another topic? I don't want to move on to the convocation because that is another stream's big topic. But let's kind of move on to what all goes on in Amaurot as far as like what all it stands for, where its place in the world is, what its worldly stance is. We all know by talking to various NPCs around Amaurot that we know it was involved with worldly activities in more of like a neutral stance, but there are some who believed that they should intervene. So, what all do you think on that?
In order, by turn, how do you prepare to go?
Meowth, you talked first, so go.
You volunteered yourself.
You've been
Fair
voluntold.
enough. Okay. Okay. What I think about Amaurot is that from what I gather, and I want to make it clear, this is absolutely supposition and guessing. We're actually not given the actual stance of Amaurot in this, and what we know is during a moment of crisis, that is the final days. Aside from a snippet of how the convocation deals with certain affairs. But I think they try to maintain a cordial relationship with other cities in the star, and because of this, they didn't actually want to meddle too much in their affairs, which actually brings the conflict in one of the side quests that the Amorotian Firebrand and the other guy in the Hall of Rhetoric discuss about if Amaurot should intervene or not. Which both sides are actually valid, but you know, in times of well, basically, I think that they try to keep a low profile, but that doesn't mean they were cut off from the rest of the world. It's not. But short. Long story short, it's no Charlayan.
Far from it. Neela or Cobran, you are up. Whoever wants to go first.
I seized the opportunity to go.
Go ahead.
I found it very interesting, actually, that debate there. Should we intervene? Should we not? Neither side is truly wrong. The one is respecting autonomy, the other one is providing aid to those who might be suffering, you know? It seems very much like a metaphor for the, conflicting needs narrative of Shadowbringers itself. The ancients want their world, the new life wants to survive and not be annihilated periodically. I also found, this is just a minor side note, but when they said, I believe the phrasing they used was across the pond or across the puddle, and I was like, wow, that sounds so modern. They really evoked that well, I think.
A joke. It makes me wonder if we're the ones who are 15 feet tall, and in the future we'll have 13 shards of people who are
fuck.
a foot 8 inches tall.
The Lilliputians.
There you go.
Nice joke. Coberon, go ahead, Ned.
Yes, Gulliver here. So a lot of that, I want to dive a little deeper into. I think that it was a metaphor, not just for the events of Shadowbringers, but for the current story of 14 in a whole, where Yoshi-P really said, there are no good and evil sides in 14. It's just who won, who wrote history, and who made the other side who lost, the villain. Both sides are right. Both sides are just trying to save their people. It's just, what side of history did we grow up learning? And I think a lot of that can be boiled right down to that debate, and it actually makes me wonder if this person who's debating, who's had a very cordial, respectful debate with another ancient, was called a firebrand. What else? What are hoodlums doing in Amaurot? Are they running around with their hoods down or something, or what are they doing?
Truly hoodlums.
That's the second
Vandals.
pun. You could have saved it.
Wait,
You
is that the
could've-
third pun?
One
The
is the
hoods?
minimum quota.
The-
We need it's one or more.
Just has it at the ready. Core or Bonnie, would you like to add to this?
Core can go first.
Okay. I like to interpret that particular quest and a lot of the other ones as being reflective of the city as not only a memory of the city itself, but also as more of an educational aid. Emmett really intended, I think, for it to be a few different things, but one of them was to re-educate us on the society that he had come from and that we had come from, and trying to bring out memory through education by teaching the little life essentially what it had lost and the kinds of debates that people used to have, which are in some sense a stark contrast to the kinds of things that we see people arguing about up above, even just on the first or on the source. It seems a lot less. It seems a lot more compassionate and a lot less petty of an argument, like a debate between those two sides, than you might see in, say, Ishgard.
That's true as well.
Well,
This reminds me, one of my favorite quotes from any Final Fantasy 14 trailer is from the patch leading up to the Gimlet Dark. Amy, you'll remember we talked at length back then about Varys's quote about no longer will there be any disparities born of the dissension of our differences.
And that's a really another good point to bring up too, because it makes you wonder just how much Varys was told about the beginnings, what all the Ascians had in mind for the rejoining of the Star, what all he knew. But that's a discussion for another time, though.
It is,
so,
yeah.
Bonnie, your turn.
So one of the things that interests me with Amaurot currently is I know that everyone draws the parallels to Charlayan and what we know of Charlayan, but with what we currently know of the convocations function, it also reminds me of Gridania's system of government pre Kane Senna basically getting, head honcho status. Because before she was head honcho status, they worked on basically a council system, which is essentially what the convocation seems to be. And that can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. And I think we see some of that not only with Gridania, but also with Amaurot, because, the whole idea of the final days have come too soon, implying that, they were probably too busy discussing what to do instead of actually doing something.
You definitely get the sense that their society, not unlike Moore's Utopia, is very bureaucratic in a lot of respects. They have a lot of bureaus for thinking about what to do, but they don't actually do a lot of doing, or at least not as presented to our perspective, which is admittedly a bit skewed to some degree.
That is one good point to bring up here. We see a fairly small snapshot in a fairly small time period of a huge ancient history. So we're we do our best with what we're presented, but we just don't. We're forced to extrapolate quite a bit here.
So, and Fao, I think you're the only one who hasn't really added anything. Would you like to go ahead and add your take on it?
I actually don't think we should save the convocation in at least a cursory manner for another topic. I think it's very important that we discuss the kind of society Amaurot had, and not just maybe the fact that they're a council of co-equals with a tiebreaker, but things like the roles that they covered. We have seen Matron in game. We've seen references to other characters, and we've also seen the dungeons. Their areas of expertise and this kind of thing. I think it's topical. It's all in Amaurot. We can take a deeper dive later, but I think it's worth discussing.
So you'd like to go ahead and add the convocation to our discussion then?
May as well, just in cursory note anyway.
Okay, so we can add that. Since we all have our own we all added our own thoughts on Amaurot, why don't we move on to the various institutions centered around Amaurot too? The Academia, the Anamnesis, what all they were built for, what all they had in them, what all they stood for. Let's start with the Academia, which, as you all may know, is an actual instance, an actual dungeon inside Shadowbringers. You can go in and out of it. There are various creations that you can look upon and see throughout the halls, and most notably, you can see that 3 of the convocation sigils are visible there as part of kind of like the wings, or what they call the words of the institution itself. So let's take it from the top. Why don't we start with Shadow Meowth? We'll start with you.
Now I'm the top. Okay.
Because you're fun to tease. And it's easy.
Okay, so do you want me to talk about Academia then?
Academia. Let's start from the top.
Academia neither. First of all, I feel like it's proper to point out that there's 2 neithers, but we are going to talk about later about one. But I find interesting that there's a twin, a twin institution of sorts that actually they work in tandem. But we're going to speak about this later, I suppose.
Yes, the Academia first, like Anamnesis later.
Okay, so I feel like Academia is pretty much, of course, I'm rather sure it's not the only one, but it's the first and foremost, probably what we would call today an university or college. So it's probably the most prestigious one. The one in which the members of the convocation have actually teaching positions. That's actually probably the most important in Amaurot, and probably in the whole of the Star. So yeah, that's kind of interesting, and also it seems that Academia favors the the practical applyment of concepts instead of more. I mean, they actually made the concepts instead of researching them, which means it. I mean, I just want to, without speaking of anamnesis, it's kind of complicated to speculate about the function of academia. But I feel like academia was the active facility. I mean, the facility, the institution of activity where people were taught, when there was active research and everything like that. Anamnesis seems like properly and serve another purpose. And yes, we have that we know 3 wings that actually seats of the convocation of the holders of the seat impart lectures there. At least we know 3. Probably, I guess it could be more, since we only visit like probably a small part of academia neither. And yes, that.
Words of Azem when.
Exactly.
Right.
Let's
You
move
know,
on.
that's just a. You know that's just a vineyard, you know.
Let's move on to Bonnie now. Bonnie, your thoughts on academia?
This was like the worst expansion for us to not get hard mode dungeons.
Oh boy.
So,
Like, I want more Academia and Eider so much. I don't really have too much to add unless you guys actually want me to go through and read the visitor guides since I'm in there right now.
Oh, you're actually in there right now.
Explorer
You're actually
mode
in
is
game.
amazing.
That
If you
was
guys haven't
quick.
tried it, you should. It's really great.
Well, since you're already in there, are you already at one right now?
Yeah, I'm in the Words of Mitron at the moment.
Go ahead, since you're already there.
This Hall of Learning was established in honor of the first Mitron, a scholar renowned for his exceptional contributions to our marine biosphere. It is here that many ichthyologists seek to follow in Mitron's footsteps and engender sea creatures characterized by traits both unique and beneficial. Diversity is the key to a robust star. The ocean is the soup of life, and we must endeavor to enhance its richness. Such were the words of Mitron, and they guide our research to this day.
And now your thoughts on that? He was
They
an
fishy.
They fishy. He was an ichthyologist. We've killed Meowth.
That's like my goal every episode if you haven't figured that out.
It's not hard
already.
either.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Core, go ahead and while Bonnie is moving on to the next part. Go ahead.
Of course.
How did you know?
It's a given.
Because I know you too well.
I would
Did they freak
definitely.
Meowth is dead.
I would definitely concur with Meowth's assessment of academia being more of a educational institution that's active. I would also certainly think that it's very likely that every single member of the convocation taught something there, presumably, potentially even having each of them a different subsection or school of creation magic that they might have taught, like something that they specialized in that they imparted to people. And you see a lot of that with Mitrons, especially because Mitrons has an actual like lecture hall as its first part, which is where Bonnie was just talking out of, a place with a podium and lots of seating and all of those really like nice aquariums to take in. So I would certainly love to see more of it myself, and better yet, see more educational like material there. One other thing that I wanted to bring up was that I found La Hebrea's words to be particularly interesting because they have, and this has been pointed out by a few other people like Emmy on Twitter, Iggy Orm, that there's a lot of like what appears to be ancient relics, like past civilization kind of relics, on display. So I'm wondering if La Habrea and maybe other members of the convocation had an archaeological or anthropological kind of element to their role, in that a lot of the concept creation that they did might have been inspired by previous civilizations that came about before the time of Amaurot's height that we see.
I think that's actually a really good speculation, because if you think about it, Amaurot couldn't have just blinked into existence. There had to have been some kind of evolution of
they
society.
probably had a long history.
And they have probably forgotten about it, considering their long lives.
Right. I also really like the analogy of academia being a university, with each of its colleges being devoted to something else, either ichthyology or phantomology, biology with Amaurot. But I think not only was the purpose to communicate to the public and allow them to interact with the convocation pretty much face to face, but I think the primary purpose was to find basically discover what they didn't know. Because if you think about the society of Amaurot, when there is so much that they don't have to worry about. They don't have to worry about violence. They don't have to worry about famine or a lot of things, really. And they've solved a lot of those problems. So at that point, they turn to what's left. How do we improve ourselves? And once we've improved ourselves, what's after that? And I think a lot of the research that was going on at academia was to kind of find new questions and say, well, what don't we know, and how do we find those questions and then find answers to those questions?
All right, Bonnie, have you made it to the second one?
Of course.
Of course you have. Doesn't take long. Go ahead. This is the words of Amaurot, I think.
It is.
Dude.
Coberan's favorite.
Did
You know that the original Amaurot, a man lauded for countless advancements in the field of phytobiology, was an avid landscape gardener? He was famed for botanical labyrinths of intricate design, the foliage of which he sought to protect from voracious pests with the inventive application of creation magics, a recreational project said to have led to the evolution of the world's first carnivorous plants. Students of his research later expanded upon those early techniques and successfully developed an extended family of ambulatory flora. If you too wish to set down roots in this fertile field of study, hearken you to the words of Amaurot and submit your application to the Academia.
We offer financial aid.
Final Fantasy XIV said pun rights.
You couldn't resist.
Well, like, that's just your opinion, man.
He just wants his rug back.
Put in your application today. The Academia also has a free trial up to level 60 in Heavensworth.
Facts.
Oh my god, those commercials like hurt my soul.
They're really bad.
At least
The
it's
US
not as
ones.
bad as the Rum Reborn one. Oh god.
They're almost there.
I think they could have just used the anime one and it would have played fine.
I think Meowth is going to be done by the end of this.
Breathe.
Neela, go ahead and go next.
All right. I found
Oh, God.
the lore and information revealed in the Academia Annotator very interesting, actually. It was a direct confirmation that both Amaurot and Maitrin were not the first, the ones we see as Asians, or don't see in Amaurot's case, are not the first in their positions, but successors to that position in the convocation. That there was at least one that came before, possibly many. We just don't know. Don't be so selfish, Koran. Okay. I also found it interesting. There was sort of a theme going through the entirety of the Academia. We have plant life, we have ocean life, and then phantomology, which is not a real field of study, so it makes it hard to say, oh, well, it's this. But most people seem to sort of concur that it is probably to do with the soul, phantom being like ghost. And
Well,
so it's like... It's just interesting. All about life.
If you allow me to make a note about the soul, there's actually one of the. It's actually the only one mob in the whole academia enemy, and it's in the final pool of Academia Neither. In the words of Lahabra, that's Phantomology, we find an engendered soma. And the soma is a term. It's basically the black spirit thing, you know. The soma is actually one of the key. When it's a term to define. Well, long story short, it's related to the soul.
I hadn't known that. That's very interesting. Thank you. I also had one other thing that
you know that now.
I just learned that. I don't like the more you know thing. I just go with that. You just learned that.
Go ahead, Neela.
I had one other thing that I noticed quite some time back about the words of this, words of that. I was like, well, what does this mean? Well, I was driving my niece to school and we talk about stuff, you know, as one does. And at one point I found myself breaking down what biology means, what it is, what it does. Bios meaning, I want to say this is Greek, right? Crap, I'm so bad with telling Greek and Latin apart. Anyway, bios means life, logos means words or discussion. Biology, words of life. It could be nothing. It could be anything, but I look at the words of this and I'm like, so it's the study of this, it's the words of that.
I have some input on this as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the double logic on this is obviously logos as word, but also the logos as in the thing that breathes creation into the world. In you know, the big three Western religion complex.
Very interesting.
So creation magic linking itself to the creation of the world, and then the original progenitors of the convocation being the prime movers of the life on the planet, with Mitron doing the seas, obviously, and then the first Amaurot doing the plants, and then in La Habrea's case, which we're coming to, it's not just phantomology, but you can see a lot of artifacts in his halls that are animals of fantasy, but also there's a saber-toothed cat, which went extinct on Earth during the last ice age.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting anyways because you may actually be onto something, considering that indeed Mitron oversees the seas. That sounds redundant, but Amaurot oversees the land, and then and then we find phantomology, which is basically kind of you could translate as studies of the soul in a sense. I mean, phantom could mean many things. And the last boss we fight there is actually Quetzalcoatl, which is an Aztec sun deity. So that's kind of interesting if we find ourselves. This is the district of sea, this is the district of land, and this is the district of the heavens.
Yes.
It's also worth noting that that's straight ripped from Final Fantasy VIII, where it was a guardian force, as its subtitle implies. But the name does, I mean, the choice of that specific one, there was a bunch of guardian forces in VIII, does not escape me, yes.
Bonnie, you're already at the next page. I know you are, so go ahead and read it.
The instances of spontaneous creation occurring in the lands across the ocean are now a confirmed phenomenon. Seemingly unguided by conscious will, these aberrations are said to manifest as malformed beasts of nightmarish aspect and unrestrained ferocity. High-ranking phantomologists have since been dispatched to afflicted areas, where they conducted the capture and transport of a single entity. This specimen, characterized by a disproportionately large maw, was dubbed Archaeotania, and investigations into its etheric composition are ongoing. A theory posited by the esteemed La Habrea suggests that the shape these fiendish beings assume is not random, but rather an amalgamation of the fears which lurk beneath our rational minds. As of this writing, researchers have begun pursuing methods by which potent guardians of deliberate designs might be engendered to stand against this mounting threat.
And as you all know, Archaeotania is a world boss, actually, that is spawned by a fate chain in the zone of the Tempest. So
That was something in there that's actually this could be a topic for another day. But the fact that the report actually goes and calls the, let's call them the terminus beasts, malformed creatures, which is a term that's more than once used to refer as the sundered. I actually wonder if they're the product of fear. Does that mean the children of Hyrule are also the product of fear? I'm just going to leave that hanging there. It's just something that kind of clicked in my head as Bonnie was reading it.
It does seem intentional. I agree.
So I have a theory, and this is going to sound wild. This is my tinfoil hat coming on. So.
Where's the emote?
I'm using it in spirit.
Well, I had written about this actually on another streamer's stream in the chat as just kind of my own personal thing. But to summarize my theory, they had known about the calamity across the pond, so to speak, and had brought aberrations from the area to kind of study and research on, which would explain Archaeotania and some other of the beasts in there. And the reason why we see Academia Aniter kind of get into a mess there is because the beasts broke free, Archaeotania being one of them. So the product of fear is not just from Archaeotania breaking free, but from the fear of the calamity across the sea, kind of getting into the back of the researchers' minds. So when we go in there, it's not hard to put away that we could be witnessing the first part of the final days here, or at least the beginning part of the final days, because what they were trying to do was trying to solve the problem, but in the end, they instead created a problem for themselves, not knowing what all they were up against. When you bring things that you don't understand back to a place that you do understand, and it creates problems, you create more problems for yourself.
So
in essence, they might have been bringing the contagion back.
Yeah. So yes and no to an extent. So I've made this comparison before. What happened during the final days with the keening and the sound really reminded me a lot of what happened in the movie Forbidden Planet, where you've got this super advanced race, and on like the very eve of them ascending or evolving or doing this big thing, they create this machine that can manifest their thoughts into reality, and they didn't realize they couldn't control their subconscious thoughts. And when that happened, when they started losing control of their creation magics and their subconscious thoughts started manifesting themselves, even if they didn't feel any fear, there was always something integral to life and creation, that survival instinct, that base fear that would always come out because of that. And I think that's really what drove this this calamity.
I would also like to stick something on the tail of that, if I may. It's also worth bearing in mind, yes, everyone has the subconscious fears. They can be individual, they can be whatever. We're not always really aware of them, but they do drive us. But when something happens to cause a bunch of people to start fearing the same thing, in this case, that actually could potentially empower it directly.
It would also and the reason I bring up this too, and not to discredit Cobron on his theory either, because he would know far more about it than I would. I'm just throwing my theory out there. Is that they created the Guardian forces to, like that note said, kind of put them in subjugate the beasts that were already in the Uneater for study. And we see that at the end when the Ancient sacrifices them their life energies for Quetzalcoatl. And we don't know for a fact even that if Quetzalcoatl prevailed against Archaeotania at all, because Archaeotania is actually, like I said earlier, is actually a boss fate in the Tempest Zone, so he very well could have survived all this time.
Yeah,
It's
it's
actually.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, the Guardian forces and the start of the art in a sense, because well, we don't know exactly, but they actually created other entities that would remind us of other summons or icons. There's Ifrita in the tale, in the second tale from the shadows of Ametzelk, that was made by La Habrea, and La Habrea also made Phoenix. Well, the precursor of Phoenix, anyways. And then there's Quetzalcoatl, and I would have to, considering a certain piece of dialogues, I wonder, because Quetzalcoatl is a lightning aspected Guardian force. I have to wonder if a precursor or actually Ramu was made during this period, for him to have memories of how it was, of how things were in the, well, before, you know what I mean, right?
Pre-sundering.
Yeah, pre-sundering. So perhaps Ramu and Quetzalcoatl, and I find it interesting that they're both lightning aspected, let's say, summons, because lightning is, besides being the closest element to the pole of darkness, it's also it's basically the spark of creation. So I would understand if the ancient society was closely aligned to the element of lightning. Actually, when we go through one of the side quests, when they gave us, when the clerk in the bureau of the architects gives us the matrix to create our own robe, what actually we end up getting is a lightning cluster.
Bonnie, go ahead and add your discussion.
Oh, I thought I'd had something before.
Oh, do you want to?
So
Go ahead.
Neela can go first.
I started talking at the same time as Meowth and let her go first.
No. Go ahead, Neela.
Okay.
And
It won't be
then...
long. The point I wanted to bring up was back on the point of Archaeotania. As far as I'm aware, that was part of the reconstruction, or part of the reconstruction, the recreation, solely because the Ondo come to the Warrior of Light for help, and that's how we go to Academia Anitor. That's the quest line, as I recall it, that sends us there. And that's when they're like, yeah, something's come out and it's ravaging, and it could just be that it was unsealed, but my understanding was that it was created. I'm not 100% sure on that. Also,
that was my understanding as well.
An aside on the lightning cluster, weavers use lightning clusters in crafting. I don't know if that's coincidence or not.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
So, I pulled up the boss fate description for Archaeotania, which is drawn by the scent of sanguine coral. Archaeotania finally shows itself. The time has come to end its reign of terror once and for all. So it doesn't actually confirm in any regard whether or not, it's the original Archaeotania, if it's a recreation because Emmett Selk got too detail happy. Like, it's hard to say.
Added a few unnecessary flourishes, yes, we see.
Exactly.
Keep
But
putting it
I
very
have to
gently there.
wonder. I
That's
have to
actually
wonder.
that's a good point. Actually, is that we should remember as well that Amaurot, as we see it, is his interpretation at the end of the day of the city that used to be. So anything from Hythlodaeus to the district we explore to Archaeotania running amok to the Anadirs, like keeping in mind that Animensis is actually physical, but within the city itself that we see, that's all him. And so there could be any number of unnecessary flourishes.
No, but from the way I see it, if you don't mind, if from the way I see it, I see, and this may be how I this may be simply a personal interpretation, but I feel like the whole of Amaurot is kind of, I don't know if consciously, but almost certainly subconsciously designed for the Warrior of Light to, well, to be actually to for Asim to remember. Uh, that's actually the purpose of going all the way to recreate Amaurot. So I have to wonder if the unnecessary flourish of Archaeotania is actually a memory of Emmet Silk, and actually Asim and pals went to, since Asim's role was to dispose of threats. I have to wonder if we actually relived Asim's foray into the academia to end Archaeotania.
I mean, the note implies that it's phantomologists who captured Archaeotania, not Azim and company, so it's a little hard to say there.
Yeah. I mean, it could have gone wrong still, and Archaeotania could have still, gone missing and how and escaped the city, But I have to, I can just, feel that if it was an unnecessary flourish, it was kind of, one thing is Hythlodaeus, one thing is Archaeotania.
So one more thing that I want to add, while we're still vaguely on the topic of academia, is I hear a lot of people claiming that La Habrea's field of study was the creation of weapons and forging of weapons. We don't really have any proof of that. Like, he was the head of the Phantomology department. Phantomology is not forging or otherwise creation of weapons.
That would be called like Warcraft or the like.
People tend to get that sense from those first few ads that are called literally evil weapons, the constructs, but that's a gross oversimplification.
It wouldn't make sense for the words of La Habrea to be full of archaeological finds if they were doing weapon research.
And they had no real reason, as the society that we've seen depicted, to make weapons. Like, what would they even be using them for? What would they fight?
Yeah, something that's gets spread around as canon is this idea that La Habrea is just was even back then this like mad scientist weapon creator, and we have absolutely zero proof of that.
To the contrary, it appears that his specialty as head of phantomology would have been to imbue creatures with spirit. We see that in the Phoenix short story.
Which was an accident.
Yes, strictly speaking, but if you're playing with this, then...
I've never even heard the theory that he was creating weapons. That's
Same.
insanity to me.
I wanted to add a little touch that most of you may have noticed, but some of the primary enemies we fight in the words of La Habrea are the winged unicorns, and Boss Loot in A Realm Reborn, the storyline involving him for the most part. You get ponies as your mounts.
Yes.
Some
That's actually
to the Asian gifting these to the beast tribes.
Yeah. That's actually something I was actually rereading Utopia for reference. That's actually a point that Hythlodae makes when describing Utopia, that horses were rare there. So them being a creation, and they were considered too precious to do labor. to the labor. So being horses being like very precious creation from the most eminent health researcher of Amaurot. It kind of sounds right in a sense. It's kind of a little detail that this thing was scarce in Utopia. Let's make it like the one of the crown creations for the speaker of the convocation.
Would anyone else like to add to this, or shall we go on to anamnesis?
Well, Meowth did just remind me that we didn't actually talk about any of the known titles, which can be summarized really quickly as we know La Habrea's title is the Speaker, we know Elidibus is the Emissary, and we don't have any other confirmed titles whatsoever for anyone else, and it drives me up the wall.
Like, we have the implication from 12 and Tactics of what the Espers and everything, like all that, like what the implication for their like other titles would be. But not their like actual official, like this is what they actually did as a job kind of thing. You can get the sense that La Habrea was probably like the council's moderator or speaker or something, like you would see in a modern democracy, kind of like parliamentary kind of debate where there's a speaker who moderates the debate and keeps track of time. Or you can imagine Elidibus going to the other cities around the star and being a diplomat. But we don't really know as much about what the others did in that sense, like what their maybe like full job title was.
Well, on that note, let me break it down a little more, if I might, just because it is very confusing. You say title, and it's like, okay, which one are we referring to? The title matron, which is the standard.
Exactly, yeah.
The role that they fulfilled, like La Habrea, and yes, the Japanese, actually, the term used for speaker in Japanese for La Habrea is the same one used as, say, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Kind of a first among equals sort of thing. Or do you mean the Scion of Light title, the Abyssal Celebrant? Like, La Habrea is a prime example because he's got them all. I've taken using nomenclature to distinguish them just because it's so flippin' confusing. And it's not by any means canon or anything.
Yeah, it could be that they have all three.
Exactly. La Habrea has all three. La Habrea has true name, a spoiler, we still don't know it. He has the title La Habrea for his seat. I've been calling the Abyssal Celebrant like an epithet, like Kings get or whatever once they pass on. It's a little way to distinguish La Habrea the first from La Habrea the third from La Habrea.
Right.
And then his billet, or the role that he fulfills, is the Speaker, but again, like I said, I'm just making that up because I need some way to distinguish it. My brain can't categorize it otherwise.
Yeah, Square was like, so we heard you like titles, so we gave you titles for your titles, so you can title while you're titling.
Pseudo pandemonium.
Genuine pandemonium.
I think we killed Meowth again.
Wait, yes.
I think we've killed the academia.
Title
This is the show of killing Meowth.
Excellent.
Oh no.
Breathing is excellent.
Do I need to
She will have
mute
a
you?
proper mic, and you will be able to hear her in full HD.
Okay, I'm fine.
Are you?
Fandaniel hears you dying and wants to know your location.
Excuse me, quick, BLB dying. Broadcast my location loud and clear.
Anyways, let's move on to Anamnesis Aniter. I'm gonna start with Bonnie on this.
I mean, I'm kind of dying over here, too.
Is there anyone not cracking up in here?
I mean, I'm just smirking and thinking of Fandaniel's, sort of.
Okay, Anamnesis is yours then.
I have lots of thoughts on Anamnesis. This one was a very exciting dungeon for me. Because for a long time I've been fighting with people saying, hey, Emmett Silk glamored over existing buildings when he created this thing, and people saying, no, it's all ghostly. And I'm like, okay, so how do we walk on it? You can see this walk. Anyway, I'll go on and on about it. But Anamnesis Anador was a demonstration that, completely untouched by him, long ways out. We don't know exactly how far because we're riding on Bismarck, but it's a ways out there. It was still intact. It's nasty, it's overgrown, it's kind of tarnished looking, but it's still there. It's still whole. And once we get the doors open, it's pristine inside. They had some really epic technologies to make this stuff. I guess probably creation magic. Modern concrete, modern stuff like that would not stay that good that long.
Don't you think it looked like almost kind of like a hospital or a research center of some sort on the outside? Would you say?
The outside
To
was
me, it looks like a bureau.
Yeah, it looked like a very large, fancy, important building. Like it could be a Capitol building with the broad face of it and the fancy, like it had this like fountain in the front. All that
It
jazz.
reminds me a lot of Cornell University up in New York. Some of the buildings up there.
Actually, its code name before it was revealed, Anamnesis Anador, as I think it was in the forums, or I don't recall if it was in the live letter. Anyways, who translated it noted that it was code as Anamnesis Anador was coded as the Asian residency.
Yes, and we were excited and hoping for lots of roommate shenanigans, and unfortunately we didn't get any of that. Tragic. It would have been lovely. Interestingly, the word anamnesis itself actually refers to remembering, especially from past lives, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. It's,
which is very interesting.
According to Plato, is the capability of the soul to remember events of past lives that have been forgotten upon reincarnation. That's actually the definition. So yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
There's two definitions.
Yeah.
The first one's the Plato one. The second one is medicine, a patient's account of a medical history.
Yeah, less exciting, unfortunately. I will say, based on that title, I had thought we were going to get some direct memory. What we got was a recording, which is interesting in its own way.
That
precise
recording.
I had my tinfoil hat theories, but yeah, we'll keep those to myself for right now because they're out there, and I've run them by Bonnie, and she's like, "Eh."
I want to hear it.
Core, go ahead.
Go into them anyway.
I didn't really have nearly as many crackpot theories about what it could be. I was mostly just hoping it would give us like a sense of who we used to be, like, because that I think was what everybody was really, really hoping for, was a sense of like who the heck we were relative to, oh, who was that Emmett saw when he was fighting with us in the end of the Amaurot dungeon. What we ended up having was the crusty building that we talked about, the exquisite interior, which looked very much like a storage facility, and then the Noesis section of it, where the final boss fight is and the recordings play out, which definitely felt like an even bigger kind of like storage facility that I could almost envision being a kind of place where one might come up with a primal, or even the first of primals, in the sense of maybe Anamnesis might have been the very birthplace of the idea of Zodiark and Heidelin as primals that they would summon to solve their respective problems. In the first case, the sound, to try and solve the sound, and then Heidelin later being an invention of Venat's group to contain Zodiark. So maybe they figured out how to do that in these very walls, essentially.
So that actually kind of aligns with my theory as well. Because, you know what, I'll just share it anyways. You guys can think I'm stupid anyways. So, I believe that Anamnesis was kind of like, almost like a research lab, almost like a hospital, almost. They kept the concepts that normal Amaurotines would have, kind of like a catalog library. And they would research them, and it is actually displayed below when you go into the further rooms, and you would actually see like individual like capsules where you would see them operating on. You would see tables, you would see instruments, you would see the capsules laying there for them to experiment on, to kind of work on. You see the kind of like almost like a chandelier machine. In medicine, they all have the same thing, almost like it. What it does is it rotates the capsules that when you have blood drawn or you have samples drawn from a subject, it basically rotates them instead of them staying in one place and being congealed. Is the purpose of that.
Centrifuge, right?
Pretty much, yeah. So, and as you go further down below, you see some of the bigger capsules, which are, instead of being placed on the chandelier type machine, they are placed in like almost like a giant, I would say just a crate almost, or hung from the ceiling. I would say one or the other. Either the thing that brings them up on the ceiling would be used to bring it into the center of that giant area where we fight the turtle boss, and they would from there kind of determine whether or not a creation was dangerous, whether or not the creation's abilities were useful or not. Basically, it was like their test area, which is why that recording was down there too. Now, that recording had me thinking, because Vinaz's group, if they were here, would probably have been a part of the researchers here at Anamnesis, meeting in secret in the lab downstairs. So, another tinfoil hat theory. They probably met in secret down below there as the birth of Heidelin in that area. I'm thinking that the reason being is those individual capsules were used for individual species like beastmen, things like what was it called? I'll just say like beastmen, individual species throughout the world. Nothing like primals, which I believe were in the giant capsules, things that required more ether, things that required ancients to give up more of their life force, basically. So you can consider like maybe Ephrita, that La Habrea was had conceived, to be put inside one of those larger capsules and stored for later use. Now, as for the summoning of Heidelin, I believe that it was done, according to that recording, because it is done downstairs at that area. I believe it was the idea for Heidelin was conceived down in that area down there and recorded for later use. Tinfoil hat off. Go.
I have a tinfoil edition.
Go ahead, Val.
What if the fact that we can summon at all relies on the fact that these containers still exist in the world?
That would be interesting.
Rather than just some floaty life stream nonsense. What if the fact that these still physically exist on the first is why we can summon it all?
I mean, I expect that there's concepts that have been preserved on the source. Stares menacingly at Charlene.
Yeah, field trip, please.
Wouldn't that be an interesting reason for their reliance on the idea that we need to hoard all knowledge and keep it only to ourselves and not teach anybody else about it? Because maybe they've got some dark secret that they need to keep it secret.
Yeah, and like they had prior knowledge of like primal summoning and that you could summon a primal into a person, which is really suspicious because you kind of learn that back in ARR when we don't really know too much about that at that point in the MSQ. There's a lot sus there. You kind of broke my brain again, Ayumi.
Oh. Go ahead. Do tell.
So talking about medicinal centrifuges and how that's, you know,
I only know this. I want to say I only know this because I'm epileptic and they show me things at the lab. So when they're taking my blood, they're like, I'm like, what does that do? oh, this does this. I'm like, okay, so continue.
Yeah, so we often refer to the life stream as the lifeblood of the planet. And you're very right that those machines in the Archive Eternal do look like some kind of centrifuge, and then there's smaller ones on the table if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
But in the very last area of Anamnesis Anator, the entire floor outside of the boss arena is kind of like what we associate with Lifestream colors, and I've always been like, okay, is this liquid? Is this just for show? Is this supposed to be just normal ether, or is it actually Lifestream? And now I'm sitting here wondering, you know, are the concepts basically just filled with Lifestream juice and spun in a centrifuge, and that's why they're the colors they are? And if that is the case, then why are some of them orange and red? Is this an indication of corruption or some sort of process
could be
that
a mix.
alters the quality?
I
Kind of like
look at this with Ayumi months ago.
Yeah, go ahead.
The large containers, it's not that some are orange and red and some are blue and some are mixed. If you look closely at some that are being pulled out of the vat but haven't quite made it out, all of them have an orange bottom, it seems.
Well, in the earlier sections, there are orange ones and blue ones in with the
Oh yeah, you're
bluish
talking
green
about the
ones.
small ones. Yeah, absolutely.
Consider also this, though. What if the life stream is green because all of these lives, these concepts are that color? The other way around. Again, still tinfoil, but kind of cool.
I also want to keep in mind that we look in Mordona at all of the corrupted crystals there having kind of an orange bottom, and I have to wonder if those containers are perhaps in some respect elementally corrupted from their long dormancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought when I first saw the big ones at the very end. I was like, oh, that could be corruption or any number of bad things.
It could
It's very
also be
consistent.
At the same time, if you want to go check not ancient related big ass crystals at orange and blue, go to Labyrinth of the Ancients, and the final arena has some weird ass big giant crystals that are precisely the same shade as blue orange in the same distribution. They are kind of sculpted, but it's the same in essence. In essence, and the Labyrinth of the Ancients, well, let's just say it's kind of interesting in terms of let's say naming themes and stuff, considering Livestream, as the ancients call it, the underworld, and we have enemies there like Nemesis, Thanatos, Phlegethon. Yeah, well, you get it.
So I'd like to also add to the capsule theory. So we see several of them that are bluish green. We also see some of them that are orangish and red. I'd like to think that also that the ones that are kind of like orangish and red, and they have been, what I mentioned earlier, kind of like congealed, things that have been corrupted, things that have been sitting, kind of like how when you fill containers with solution, when you fill containers with blood, when you fill containers with a certain type of chemical, if they are sat out for too long, or if they have not been adjusted or kind of tampered with, mixed in so long, the chemicals inside kind of just die out, or they just kind of go into stasis.
Or they like settle.
They could
They
settle
pretty
or
much-
precipitate out, yeah.
Yeah, and
Like
what that happens.
Like when you like when you dissolve a medicine in a powder medicine in your drink, and it goes to the bottom of the glass.
Or like when
Yeah,
when you drink milk, and if you are like me and be weird and like add syrup to the milk and drink it like that, chocolate milk, strawberry milk, or
Yeah.
whatever, and
Basically,
you leave it
chemical
out.
half-life.
Yeah. So basically,
Balance from Baru wants to know your location.
I'm
yeah.
glad someone said it. So Ayumi, you're now known as Milky Boy.
I'm gonna mute you, Shadow. She's gonna fall out of her chair.
Should we send
404,
help?
Meowth not found.
Anyways, so like I was saying about earlier about the chocolate and the strawberry milk. So you know how if you drink it all and there's still some at the bottom and you leave it out for too long, there's like residue at the bottom, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Same principle. If there is residue, stuff left over, if it's been used, if it's been set out for too long, there is residue left over. And it can spoil if left out for too long. That's what I believe what happened with the capsules. They turned orange and red, meaning that they've corrupted or been sat out for too long. Whereas the blue and green ones are fresh. They're still usable, pretty much.
It could also just be nothing more than markings like, oh, this one's great, this one's iffy, this one's dangerous, but probably not.
Right. That was just my theory anyways. But
It's an interesting theory.
Yeah,
Could be
I'm
a
thinking
rotary
about it too,
distracts us.
like a ferrochemical research is kind of what this would be, wouldn't it? It's like a very early, I don't want to say very early form, that sounds weird considering how, yeah, like, we see similar stuff with Alag. Like, if you go into some of the Warring Triad fights, there's what looks like dual-aspected crystal containers in the arenas for some of those fights. And I'm just like, okay, is this naturally occurring? Is this something produced through a ferrochemical research? Like, there's so many different ways that the Amaurotine concepts can tie into later stuff.
I'm telling you, my theories aren't terrible.
Also, the right in chat was pointed out that we consider anamnesis as a research, a concept research facility, but in terms of deeming the safety and that stuff and everything, and storing concept, there was already the Bureau of the Architects, and Hythlodius was in charge of that. So
Yeah.
that makes me think, if the Bureau of the Architect was kind of more like your, I don't want to say like that because Hythlodius probably would murder my ass, but it feels kind of for more mundane, regular citizenry use, and anamnesis was kind of only for exclusive use, for research, or kind of research only, and only for academia neither, because Urianger, if you go and talk to him during MSQ, before in one of his dialogues, he says that probably, and that's his theory, but he says that they are academia and either, and there's anamnesis and either. It means that anamnesis work as the storage for academia research. So that's when before we spoke of academia, I wanted to point out too that academia seems more to go into practical research, and anamnesis maybe was more about theoretical research, and that's more like a passive. And if we, knowing what we know, that academia was kind of the realm of the convocation, and anamnesis turned out the Venat's followers headquarters, it sets the difference between the active pole and the passive pole. That, of course, then it turns around and it's a mess up of that. But that's actually a rather interesting thing to consider. I think.
Go around.
Yeah,
Would you like to?
thing
Go
about
ahead. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Another thing about the whole Bureau of the Architect thing, which this kind of goes into people speculating versus what we have confirmed. I should probably look at the duty description as well for this, but a lot of people spread that anamnesis is where all the concepts went for storage after being reviewed at the Bureau of the Architect. I think some of that is just because of how many concepts there are, but also the fact that that one area is called the Archive Eternal. I don't think we have confirmation on that, though.
I don't believe we
No.
do know.
The building seems
Logical
too large
assumption,
to
but it
just be storage.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the
Yes.
initial chamber that we go into, which is all pristine, definitely looks like it was used for research, not just for storage.
Yeah.
That actually,
But we have to consider that one thing is personal. Of course, the bureau apparently store personal things like Ifrita for La Habrea. That's the bureau acts like a private storing and common storing as well for concept that everyone can use. But anamnesis feels like something really restricted. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like only on that's just the.
There's a
I
public
don't- I-
facing kind of creation, and then there's a professional, more like
Hmm.
almost clinical kind of creation. Is I
I
think
would
kind of
actually,
that.
I would actually say that anamnesis is more like the theoretical research, and where probably the blueprints of anything done in academia was stored, and probably this includes zodiac and blueprints that probably, or maybe, or I don't know, maybe this was this was how Evena and her followers managed to summon Heidelin using Zodiac's blueprint, but gone wrong.
Go ahead and
have we
add to this,
talked-
Coberon.
yeah, have we talked about whether or not the Knots faction was actually based in Anamnesis, or if there were just the records that were accessed?
The records were
through
accessed
there.
in that actual area, and that's when we found out about Vana, and that his
Right. But was that recording at Anamnesis, or was that taken somewhere else? So
we don't have that confirmation.
Okay. See, that's just what I'm asking, because I was wondering whether or not
That was
they
one of my
had gone
theories,
there.
though, because the recording is right there. It could have been transmitted somewhere else, but again, that my theory was that they had met at that place there, as there's kind of like sort of like headquarters, kind of meeting in secret, and the concept of Heidelin was thought up there. What better place to think up a concept than a research lab?
Oh, absolutely.
Among other things.
Yes.
To Bonnie's point earlier, as much as I want hard modes, I understand that they can't really lock themselves into using up the rest of the convocation right now. So when they probably need them for 6.0.
Hopefully, we see them more in Pandemonium as kind of a whole.
I really hope so.
I wanted to add on to that comment really quick. This goes back to academia, but as you're turning left to go up the stairs to Quetzalcoatl, if you turn right instead, you can see that there's a big locked door. So there definitely are more offices there. We just got the Dungeon Light version.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's actually even that section like just down the way from where the front door is. And there's also a second door across from the door we go into to get to Mitron's words. So there's like, I imagine there's
It's a big campus.
It's a whole campus full of every single word of the convocation. So there would have presumably been ones for every seat.
Yeah, like they have a really good reason for not doing more hard mode dungeons. Like they were definitely getting to the point where we were getting dungeon bloat majorly, and it was just going to get worse and worse with each expansion. And moving those resources around is why things like Bosnia and the weapon quest line have just had so much meat to them. But I'm also like, if we were going to have like meaningful lore dungeons, this was so the expansion to do that.
They don't even necessarily need to present it in a dungeon form. They could just create some kind of context for us to go there as of recollection.
Hell,
Keep
they
in
could-
mind
they-
that
they- they
Yeah,
could. Sorry.
Cobra, go first.
Okay, keep in mind that just because we haven't gotten hard modes in this expansion doesn't mean we won't get hard modes for these dungeons in next expansions.
Right, because they go back to, if you think about how they did it in like a Realm Reborn and Heaven's Ward. In Heaven's Ward, they actually introduced hard modes of some of the previous dungeons, like Lost City of Amdapor. Actually, they didn't release that in Heaven's Ward, but they did. They have a tendency to release hard modes of older dungeons in some of the later patches, later expansions. So it's not unfeasible for them to release it later, possibly in Endwalker, a hard mode of some of the earlier dungeons.
My understanding was that they were no longer doing hard modes, period. But I could be wrong. I'm not an expert on that.
They did kind of word it that way, but we don't know if that's just like a translation quirk.
If I'm late, unless someone else has something to add on to this, I want to go back to that.
In any case, they now that they added the collection tab, and we're doing that for both the near raids and the Bolgia quest lines about the files that drop and are filled to the brim with lore about Bolgia and the Empire and stuff, which that's probably my main reason for running Bolgia actually. I mean, screw the rally, go for lore. but they could actually do something like that instead of, if you don't want to go to do more dungeons for lore purposes and stuff, make a collection for MSQ, for example.
All right, Neela, you wanted to go back to Anamnesis?
A little bit, yeah. I had mentioned for the likely intention and meaning of anamnesis is remembering past lives. I think that's probably a large part of why, at the time, a lot of people assumed the Warrior of Light was in fact Vena, which has since been pretty well disproven, I think. But at the time, you look at it and be like, well, we're supposed to get our memories back. Oh, we must be Vena. However, it's also interesting to note that in French and German, Vena is specifically gendered female. Now, in Final Fantasy XII, Vena is the name of an Acuria, and the Acuria are specifically genderless. But that doesn't seem to be the case going into Final Fantasy XIV.
Didn't the English Final Fantasy XIV Twitter confirm, though, that they were essentially genderless, the Ancients?
I am aware of no such thing. As far as I'm aware, they reproduce normally. That was what the
that was basically Yoshi P when the crew was asked during a Q&A, that when they asked how the ancients reproduce, Yoshi P's answer was pretty much summarized as, do I have to tell do I have to tell you?
Yeah, do I have to talk with you right now?
I think
They use
that
creation magic.
the intention, I think, on that part was that they wanted to imply that ancients were genderless in the sense that they could potentially, probably change shape, like we see Emmett do with his different forms. But that
I believe that's
okay.
Sorry, I apologize for interrupting.
Yeah, you go first.
Understanding, if I'm remembering the correct one, and I could have it twisted, they were saying the shades are genderless; they're just generic stand-ins, but the ancients weren't like that.
Oh well. Yeah.
This
that's
is
what I
important
remember
as
too.
well
That's-
because
that's
the solo
nostalgic.
trial with Xenos, with Elidibus, you see that he purposely, not that these are one for one, but he makes them into your races so that you know what you're doing.
Oh, that's true.
Another interesting thing too is that for Metron in, I believe it's the French version, with French being such a gendered language, they made the distinction to use female pronouns for Metron in the Eden quest line, and it was confirmed on the forums that that was indeed an intentional choice and not a mistake, because they wanted to imply that Metron was a female back in the ancient days. So there's all sorts of reincarnation and whatever kind of fuckery going on.
Core, you wanted to add something?
Mainly in the sense that I get the sense that they could probably, in addition to the reincarnation and the sundering and everything, which probably has resulted in all manner of gender shenanigans, that it isn't outside the realm of possibility that back in their time they were able to assume many different forms and potentially change their gender at any given time to suit their own desires or needs. But that they did probably still they reproduced in the normal way, yes.
Well, that's kind of a given, but I assume that considering the ancients, when we spoke with them, you speak with them and they direct you to another one, they tend to refer to others like, I actually kind of recall that line of, I actually saw a gentle soul carrying, and they tend to refer to others, like to the people they're not acquainted with, as souls, instead of, I saw that one, like, blah, 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 you know? So I think that for them it was kind of something they would hardly give it much thought, you know, since especially if they could shapeshift. So for them it's kind of you know suit yourself.
Right.
Yeah, they basically use descriptors rather than pronouns is the way I usually try to describe it, because it's like that format of descriptor and then soul.
Neela, you wanted to say
So
something?
I just got back from a bio.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Meowth.
No, that at the very least, names do seem important to them, and I have to point out that though we don't know any surname given to the ancients, we do know that at least a form of them existed since the ancient clerk. Both ancient clerks we speak during the last part, like during bureaucracy in Amaurot, real endgame content. Uh, Both of them ask for our full name, so they are acquainted to the concept of full name. You know, in ancient Greece, this was pretty much names were your name and perhaps a family name, or the name of the name of the city you were born in. So it's not exactly clear, but we do know they're familiar with the concept. But names seem something they actually value in the terms of, the names of the first seats of the convocation are passed down through their successors, and I can kind of understand in a society when you can be pretty much whatever you want, you need something to define who you are, you know. And perhaps this is the case of Mitron bar Artemis. Like, when Gaia refers to Mitron as Artemis, he was he was male, but perhaps it doesn't actually really matter.
Right.
I tend to think it doesn't really matter as much, particularly because their society is so communal oriented that names are something of an individual thing that they would have perhaps referred to a little less.
This does allow us to touch on someone's tinfoil hat theory about why we wear hoods.
That's true. Do you want to go ahead and explain it, Fal?
Yeah, I forget who it was, one of us in chat the other day. It's a long-standing thought, but the idea is that the clothing of the Amaurotines is intentionally obfuscating your personality identifying characteristics because they want a communal society, which would imply that the differences are there. So some of us are thinking that actually maybe all the same races existed then.
And the reason
or
that they
something
wear
like this.
the reason they kind of wear hoods and cloaks is that they want to kind of discourage like jealousy, kind of prejudice to, yeah, basically they want to discourage the fact that people may become jealous and inferior due to how they look. So throwing a hood and a cloak over yourself so that everyone looks alike, doesn't make that problem arise.
Which kind of goes back to what we were saying, like, you know, when we started talking today, basically, about we were wondering how much Varys was actually told about the ancient times, because he makes it sound like everyone was the same race back then, but that could very easily be a misunderstanding if he saw the Amortine shades or had them described to him in kind of the way we saw them, because sure, they all look pretty fucking samey, but it also seems kind of derived from, you know, school uniforms, IRL, in a sense, where you all dress the same to reduce conflicts, which, you know, high school, that's not going to work very well. But for the Amortines, it seemed to work pretty decently.
Yeah, that's
I
something
have
of a
to-
feature of Lord's
I have
Utopia
to.
too.
I have to. Sorry.
Go ahead, Core Healer.
That's something of a feature of Moore's Utopia in particular. Was a lot of emphasis at the very beginning was made out of the fact that there were no special clothes for anyone, not even like the rulers of the city. Everyone wore the same communal attire, not necessarily robes, but all the same kind of clothing for everyone, young and old, regardless of whatever position you were in. And that didn't mean that you weren't dealing with a diverse population of people, but that everyone was still dressing the same and acquiescing to that communal drive.
Go ahead, Meowth.
Yeah, it's just that I was going to point out that I've had actually when I changed school and they were uniforms, I was less bullied for my clothing than in the other one, but that's beside the point. The other thing sorry, the other thing I wanted to point out is that I wanted to point out something I kind of forgot.
If
With Amar.
you want to sit on that thought, I have a contribution.
Go ahead.
You guys may recall when we were doing the open air questing in Amaurot, when we were meeting some of the shades, one of them recognized us as a child, and I think
Yes.
they indicated that it's cool to dress however you want when you're a kid, but once you join grown-up Amortine society, we'll need you to put on the cloak. So there was an interesting
Not
juxtaposition.
Not need per se. It's highly encouraged, and because it's not an imposition, I figure out that's why everyone did it, because they probably knew that forbidding or imposing something, it's it's actually the sure way to make people do the opposite thing.
Moreover, it's much like the debate. If you force people to do it, you're taking away their sovereignty. That's why they were hesitant to rush in and offer aid, because they didn't want to, essentially take over. They recognize that other people need to be able to make the decisions themselves.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Bonnie, or
But yes. I actually remembered.
okay.
I'm actually going to give Neela a hard time not discussing this as much as deep diving as we usually do. But the fact that the shades actually kind of look like the same to us doesn't mean that perhaps this is kind of, if you read about Jewish and biblical angels, they well, besides looking kind of, well, light wardens in a sense, the weirdest light wardens like a storage, there's also said that the human, well, in Greek mythology in particular, it's said that mankind cannot grasp the form of the gods if they're in their true form. In the first tale of the shadows about the Metzelk, it said that back in once upon a time, men and gods were one and the same. So perhaps it's not that they just look like shades. It's just that we, as the Sanders, we cannot grasp the true form of the ancients. So this paired with the theme of the ancient being as angels, and this is when I'm going to give Neil a hard time. Uh, this could be very interesting, and not just. I mean, it could be twofold. That it's just. Listen, we make them look like that because yes, because we're lazy, but also it could also serve another purpose, you know?
The
It could be very
alternative being
practical.
I'd like to, if I could.
Yeah, well, no, I mean it could be both practical in the sense of saving time and both with a lore in a lore explanation.
Go ahead, Neil.
Or
That is an interesting point, and I definitely think it bears bearing in mind because that's a common theme, especially for angelic or godlike beings. I have to counterpoint from the same story where Hypnodeus observes Emmet Selk using his sorcerer of Eld form, or whatever we might call it, and he says, "Never ceases to amaze me." It doesn't seem like an everyday or ordinary thing because of that, to my interpretation.
Core.
that was actually the exact point I was going to make. Thank you, Neela.
I thought,
So we're coming up on our 2-hour mark here. So is there any kind of closing statements that you guys would like to make on anything that we've touched on so far? Would you like to add to anything? Do you feel like Anamnesis, Academia, Amaurot, do you feel like we've touched on all the points that we can make? Do you want to, talk about it a little bit more?
The whole child thing is something I think we could talk about a little bit.
Go ahead.
The community seems relatively divided on how to take the comments of us being children to the shades throughout the MSQ. Because there seems to be two main schools of thought. There's one school of thought that thinks we're referred to as children because we're not adhering to the communal garb, and that it's like this derogatory term being used to us to kind of like insult us for not conforming. And then there's the other school of thought where take it more literally and they think that we're children just because we're tiny. And I'm curious what everyone here thinks.
I am always more interested in taking things literally where it's the most logical and kind of simple explanation. Metaphor is a wonderful tool, but lots of times you can see metaphor where none exist, just through basic human pattern recognition.
Go ahead.
I think we're just small
Yeah, we are.
and not adhering, and that it's not an insult. It's just an observation.
Yeah,
Cobra,
I
go ahead.
actually agree that it's actually not one or the other, but both. I think it's because we are smaller, but also that we are acting in a way rashly like children would act. I see them not calling us juvenile, but children. So in that distinction, I don't think it's an insult at all.
an
I
alternate
have
theory
to-
to put forth.
Go ahead, Neela.
I don't think it's at all derogatory. If you look at the way the shades treat us, they complete strangers step up. Are you okay? Where's your family? It doesn't seem at all intended to be insulting. I don't think personally, this is just my take on it. I don't think it's because of our physical size.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think it's because of our soul's low density.
Interesting. That's a good thought.
Yes, I have to agree. The Amaurotines never once, even the patronizing Amaurotine who sends us to the gentle Amaurotines for the robes because this Amaurotine was kind of frowning upon our robe or our attire. Even that Amaurotine kind of does it just in a way to help us. There's no way the Amorotines ever treat us with disdain or anything like that. To them we're just like kids that they're trying to experiment. They still don't know the ways of the world, and if you actually kind of walk up to those who you cannot actually talk, but there's a bubble of dialogue upon their heads. there's a particular one in the whole of the rhetorics that I always find that one adorable. That if you approach them, they say what a precocious little child, and they're actually rather they're endeared by us actually. I never once felt disdain in the Amaurotins.
Yeah, so it seems like we all kind of agree on that, where they're not being mean or condescending or insulting. Like, every now and then I come across people who, like, when they first get to Amaurot, they start just, like, yelling at the Shades for being condescending to them, and I'm like, no, that's not it. That's not what they're doing.
So I want to add one other thing, and it references when Emmett Selk was talking about how long the ancients lived. And when you look at societies that have extremely long lifespans, you're always going to get extremely low birth rates, which probably means that children were very rare. And so they were probably very surprised to see so many of them in one spot, too.
It's a field trip, everybody.
As far as I'm aware,
well, actually, yes. The first Amaurot we find actually ask us if we are in an excursion.
Are you from another city? Come to see the city.
Go ahead, Neela.
I was just saying, as far as I'm aware, we only see one child-sized shade. And it's asking about the creation.
Yes.
They keep them in the tubes at Anamnesis. That's where they all are.
No.
The natural way they're made.
After a symposium that's been particularly engaging.
And been voted on by a unanimous vote.
I mean, how else would they make it to the bigger tubes?
Oh my god. I'm gonna kill you.
Me first. Anyways, Core, would you like to add to this?
I generally thought of, like, if anything derogatory at all could be read into anything that they say, it could only be considered in the sense that perhaps Emmett Selk is speaking through them in the sense of looking at us as malformed and vain reflections of actual children. But even that's kind of a generous interpretation. I tend to think more like everyone else here, that they don't really have a mean bone in their bodies. They're just like, they think we're precocious, wonderful, eager, but that eventually will be set straight.
I think the only one exception would be the one Amaurotine who was like, ew, what the hell are you wearing? Go get some actual clothes from this guy over here.
His name is actually patronizing Amaurotine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yes,
But
it is.
let's be real, like, Emmett Selk can call me little one all he wants. I'm almost a foot shorter.
Hey, little one.
I'm not going to get into what I want him to call me.
What voice was that?
I must say, little one, those garments you're wearing, they are your own original concepts, I take it? Clearly they must be, given the rather singular flamboyance.
That was good.
That's actually, that's actually pretty accurate considering if you take the warrior flights, let's say,
Got those near boots on?
Yeah. I mean, consider some of the fancy armors. I assume, well, it works both ways. If you're going warrior flight with fancy armor and gear, or if you're going there wearing the frog suit.
Or the Namazu head.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things.
Sorry, I'm a fish. I got lost down here. All right, so it's about 5 till, so we'll go ahead and make our closing statements. I'm glad you guys could join us today. Amaurot, I've always thought, was a very interesting subject, a very interesting place. I'm sure you guys were amazed when you got down there and thought, "Oh, look, Xanarkand." So I'm sure that
I was thinking it.
Oh, of course.
I was not, because I haven't played 10.
Oh, so you were a BioShock fan, so you thought Rapture.
No, I haven't played Bioshock either.
My reaction was, "Oh, that's cool. Too bad we won't get to go down there."
As I
5
shoved
minutes
And we
later.
did.
as I shoved Bonnie off of the
Later.
cliff.
Very pleasant surprise.
Now, in all seriousness, and this is actually unheard of. I actually would want to, if something I would want. I actually, 25 characters. Something I actually wanted to is, how could I forget I ever came here to relive it every time as the first time when I actually saw Amaurot for the first time.
That's more
I
than
mean-
25 characters.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
God
but
damn it.
But every single time I reach Amaurot, and it's like, oh, if I only could forget that that I know this place, only to relive how I felt the first time I saw Amaurot. The only way I can relive it now is watching streamers stepping into Amaurot for the first time.
All right, so let's go ahead and close out here. So if you guys would like to follow us, we have our Twitter at lorelinesxiv. You can also follow our Twitch, which I'm sure you already are here, at twitch.tv/lorelinesxiv. You can follow each one of us individually on our Twitters. Mine is at BG_SCIZOR. Go ahead and whoever wants to go next. We'll go with Foul.
My handle is the same as my Twitch, at DeviantFox. The O in Fox is a 0.
Neela.
Surprisingly, at Neela Nurodo, that's Neela as spelled on screen _NURUODO.
Core.
Just at Core Healer, really.
And Bonnie.
At Bonnie_L_Price.
And Coberon.
Literally just put an at in front of that, and that's it.
And Shadow Meowth, who probably has the most information here.
Not really. I have 2 accounts. One of them is my main. It's mostly in Spanish, but I can also tweet in English if needed. That's how do you say it? Well, it's Meowth the Starry. The story, and I have the English exclusive one that's lowercase x, Shadow Meowth. That's English only, and I actually made it for the podcast, for the podcast really, but still, for English followers or English speaking followers. If you want, you can find me in another platforms, artistic platforms by Shadow Meowth, like DeviantArt, Tumblr. Well, Tumblr, I hardly use Tumblr anyway, but anyway. and Ko-fi for commissions and stuff, as Shadow Meowth. So yeah, it's pretty much the alias I use for everything. So yeah.
Awesome.
Doing so a bit of promotion there.
Bonnie, you didn't add to add anything, did you?
No.
No. Okay. Well,
No.
that is everything for today. Catch us again next week, same time, same bat channel. And we'll be discussing another topic. I don't know if it's going to be Amaurot again. I will probably throw up another poll, see what you guys wanted us to talk about next. Next week, we also have a killer intro that our own Coberon made for us. So look forward to that next week. But yeah,
Yay.
anyways, stream over. You guys, hope you guys had fun. And we'll catch you next week. And we'll upload the VOD on YouTube here shortly. So you guys all take care.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.